Hey everybody, it's Ken McElroy here, and I'm here with my good friend Jason Hartman. Hey Jason.
Hey Ken, how you doing, buddy?
I'm great. This Zoom stuff, huh? What do you think?
Yeah, hey, I think it's good. It's a lot easier than getting on an airplane, but I'd love to be hanging out with you in person again, and we'll do that soon. But
I know. Well, I've spoken at a lot of your events. I love what you do. You know, you're teaching people all over the world, and your masterminds and all the stuff you're doing online. It's great. What are you working on these days?
Well, you know, I got a new presentation I've been giving a lot, and it's been really well received. It's called Pandemic Investing. And, you know, Ken, I started noticing about 2.5 months ago, which in pandemic years is like dog years, right? It's like, you know, 2.5 months ago is 3 years ago nowadays. Everything's moving, changing so fast. It's just nuts what's going on in the world. And, you know, really tragic for a lot of people. I don't want to, you know, appear that I don't notice that. But at the same time, there are a lot of opportunities. And, you know, that's what we're going to talk about today. Hopefully how people can react and respond to what's going on in the world. And so I've been making the rounds talking about pandemic investing, and I'm anxious to talk to your audience about it too.
Yeah, I tell you, it's been interesting. As you know, I've been home. I haven't been investing, and everything's kind of on hold. You know, the lenders pretty much, you know, shut their doors, and even on the deals that they said they were going to do, you know, they're kind of backing away from because they don't know what the values are. And so, you know, I've been doing these YouTube videos as we were talking about before the show. And one of the biggest questions is, you know, what do we do now? Because they're super afraid of the stock market. And, you know, and I don't know if you saw, but the savings rates at the highest it's been since the 80s. And you know, people are hunkering down with cash, which I think is good because there's a lot of uncertainty. But the real question is how do we invest during this pandemic?
Yeah, no question about it. And Ken, you've been doing some awesome YouTube videos, man. I love your videos. Like, you have upped your game during this time. It's not that your game wasn't strong already. It certainly was, you know, with all your books and stuff. But your recent videos are just super good. And a lot of my friends, they send them to me, and I'm like, I already follow Ken's stuff. You don't need to send me his videos. And they ask me about them and all that kind of stuff. But so they're great. And you know, I gotta just talk with you about something before we kind of dive in, and I'll share my screen and we'll look at some slides and charts and graphs and all that good stuff for the analytical people. But you know, one of the things I noticed, and this was very early on, is that in Wuhan and in Italy, where it really hit hard in Italy, is that the common thread was that those people that were sadly really, really hit hard by the pandemic were living in high density environments. You know, I've been to China, I've been to Italy several times, and, you know, that's high density, right? And the type of investing style that you mostly do, and I don't know your entire portfolio, is this sort of suburban, you know, stick-built, like four-story maximum, but usually garden-style apartments, right? Am I right about that? Or?
Yeah, mostly 2-story, even single-story. Yeah. We're, you know, more neighborhoods.
Yeah. So your stuff, I think, is going to fare a lot better. And when we dive into this talk today, you know, one of my big predictions 2.5 months ago is that there is, and now the media is caught on, but, you know, 2.5 months ago, this was like big news, right? Nobody was saying this, at least not that I could see, is that there is going to be this mass migration. Almost like, if you remember the old book that I read in, I think, 10th grade by John Steinbeck, Grapes of Wrath.
Yeah.
There was, you know, this mass migration in America out of the Dust Bowl to the West Coast, right? And now we're going to have this mass migration, Kenny, from high density environments to low density environments. And one of the interesting things about that is you look at like New York City, sadly, very tough environment there, and tough time that they've been going through. And you look around the world, and the hardest hit areas are these high density areas where you can't socially distance. And the two danger zones that are the biggest danger zones in the social distancing world, in my opinion, are elevators and mass transit. Elevators and mass transit. Also, but even if you don't have an elevator in your building where you live and you don't take mass transit, if you're in a high density city and you go to the coffee shop, the restaurant, the grocery store, anything, it's just crowded. The aisles are small. It's hard to socially distance. And one of the neat things about America, as opposed to other countries, is the idea of suburban living. That is a uniquely American idea that really started in the post-World War II era with the baby boomers. Suburbia, right? America, for better or worse, is in love with the automobile. We love our cars in the US, right? And so we don't have good mass transit here. And that's terrible for the environment and it's inconvenient at times. But when there's a pandemic, it's really good, okay? Because, that keeps us distanced and safe. So, we can dive into some of those trends today and talk about it whenever you're ready.
Well, thanks. It's perfect timing for that because, I actually own property in Flagstaff and Sedona and some of these small little towns. And, we're blowing up. I mean, we have a number of people moving here from out of state to Arizona because they see Arizona as, naturally socially distanced.
Right. And,
you can go rent a house or a cabin up in Flagstaff and, not have a neighbor for a mile if you want,
Sure. And that's fine, but nobody needs to go that far.
Right? I know, but they are. I'm telling you.
I know they are. Yeah.
Crazy.
There's survivalists are for sure. But, you can live in Phoenix, okay, in a 2-story garden style apartment and be socially distanced. So we'll look at some stats in terms of mid-rise and high-rise buildings where you really are required to take an elevator, okay?
Right.
And those are almost always in cities where when you leave your building, you can't socially distance. And Ken, I'll tell you something, you are in the right spot being in the housing world, and so is my company, because for 16 years, we've been helping people buy single-family homes and other small apartments and low-density properties all around the U.S. And I tell you, this is a good time for our type of product.
It is. Let's jump right in and let's teach some people on what we're doing and how we're doing it. Because I think, this investment during this pandemic is a great topic and it's timely.
So I'll just go through this pandemic investing presentation. And one thing I want to say at the beginning is, look, this is so new and things are changing so quickly that it's like you put a chart on here and in a week it's out of date already. So just understand that the macro concepts are the same and those stand regardless. There's an ideology out there that in a recession or depression, the person who wins is the person who loses the least, okay? And what we have to understand is investing in economics is a relative game. And it may sound bad to say it, but at any given time, the economic pie is only so big. And the point is to lose the least. Even if you don't win and you don't gain, at least maintain. Because in a world where others are sinking, if you're treading water, you're ahead, relatively speaking, okay? So that's at the worst case. But on the better side of it, the Chinese have a symbol, and maybe many people have heard this, for crisis, and it's the same symbol for opportunity. And literally translated, this means crisis is an opportunity riding the dangerous wind. Crisis is an opportunity riding the dangerous wind. So there's always opportunities, and we're going to talk about some of those today. The advice I would give everybody is, number one, stay calm. Number two, keep good counsel. Be around people that are giving good ideas, good advice, like Ken, like his podcast, his YouTube channel, and hopefully the stuff I put out as well, my podcast, my YouTube stuff. And keep your eye on the ball. Remember, the world will wake up. This will not last forever. Things will go back to not normal, but we're going to talk about a new normal today, okay? And keep your eye on the ball. What is the big picture? Try not to be so distracted with, everything that's on the nightly news, because that will it'll just freak you out, and it's not going to be good for you. Keep your eye on the ball. What's the big picture? What's your big plan? And then always ask what my listeners on my podcast have called the Jason Hartman question. And the Jason Hartman question is, compared to what? Compared to what? Everything in life is relative. A lot of the teaching that you do is on when you teach people how to analyze deals and look at numbers on an investment, you talk about ratios and percentages. And that's what's important, because percentages and ratios tell you the relative thing. They always answer the question, compared to what? So that's what we're going to talk about a little bit today. And last, number 5, take action. You've got to take action. If you are paralyzed, you are going to lose, okay? You've got to act on things. And the people, look, I've been in the real estate business for 35 years, okay? A long time. I got my license my first year in college when I was 19 years old. And, one of the things I'll tell you is that having been through a lot of recessions, it always feels devastating when you're in it. Okay. And we're probably in a depression now. This might be the worst one that I've ever seen. Certainly could be worse than the 2008 crisis. Okay. The Great Recession, which was the worst up until then. But no matter what, the people who always win are the people that during the darkest hour, the darkest time, they do stuff. They make stuff happen. They take action. They are not paralyzed by fear. And, we had clients who were buying up properties in 2008, 2009, 2010, and look at where they're sitting now. They killed it. I mean, they killed it. Okay. So good for them. You got to take action. Okay. I learned from some of the best thought leaders. I don't claim to know all the answers, but I've done over 6,000 podcast episodes now. And look at right here, we got Ken McElroy, okay? and a whole bunch of others. And I interview these people all day long on my show. And when I interview them, I learn a ton of stuff because I'm constantly interviewing these people. Yogi Berra, the famous baseball legend, he had a great saying. He had all these great sayings, but one was, the future ain't what it used to be. And that typifies what we're going into now. We are going to wake up after this into a very different world, a new normal. Ken, I know you were talking about on one of your YouTube videos the other day about how you went to a restaurant in Scottsdale, and the owner of this restaurant, and it's just a new normal. Going out to dinner ain't what it used to be. This restaurant you were talking about, how it's always packed. And this time, it's operating at a small percentage of its old capacity. So things are going to be very, very different, okay? Back in the 80s and 90s, I got really fascinated with a group of thinkers called futurists, okay? And the first one was a guy named John Nesbitt, and he published a series of books called Megatrends. And in his Megatrends books, he talked, Ken, about all of these different trends that were going to shape our lives. And he was right about a lot of this stuff. It's amazing. But one of the things he talked about, which was really interesting, is how he moved out of the big city and moved his office to Telluride, Colorado, which he called a quality of lifestyle location, right? Telluride, Colorado is not Los Angeles, it's not San Francisco, it's not Chicago, and it's certainly not New York City, okay? It's a quality of life place. And the big technology, Ken, that he said enabled him to live in Telluride, Colorado. Get this, you ready for this one? The big technology breakthrough that enabled him to live remotely and work remotely like that was Federal Express. That was the big technology of the day that enabled him to work remotely, okay? And then there was another futurist I really followed a lot, and her name was Faith Popcorn. And Faith Popcorn published a book called The Popcorn Report. And in the Popcorn Report, she talked about the concept of cocooning, cocooning. Okay. And the idea behind cocooning is really what I'm saying today, that the home is the center of the universe. The home, where people live, is the center of the universe. And we've all seen how retail properties have been devastated the past 10, 15 years by the internet and what they call the retail apocalypse. And we've now seen that office properties are just getting devastated, and Twitter and Facebook and so many other companies have told huge shares of their employee force that they can work at home indefinitely, forever. And that lessens the demand for office space. We've had the trend I started talking about in 2003 to my audience. 17 years ago, I was talking about how they were offshoring the manufacturing to China and offshoring the office workers to the Philippines and India. If you called tech support or a call center, they were usually in the Philippines or in India, right? Or maybe in Central America. And that lessens the demand for office space. So Faith Popcorn, back to her big technology that was the idea behind cocooning, okay, where people would stay home more and more and not go out as much in the 90s, guess what that technology was? Home theater systems. Yeah, big screen TVs and home theater sound systems that could really make it very pleasant for people to stay home instead of going to a Broadway play or the movie theater, right? They could see, back before that, you didn't have these big screen TVs, or at least they weren't affordable. And you didn't have these great home theater sound systems. So home theater and cocooning, right? Now, there was another great book that I read in the 90s by Alvin Toffler, and this is called Power Shift. And Alvin Toffler, futurist, he talked about the three forms of power from the beginning of time. Okay. The first form was the ability to inflict violence. I know it sounds terrible, right? But you could control the environment and you could control other people if you were a warlord and a bully, and you could inflict pain on people, right? And that was a terrible form of power, but it was certainly true throughout history. Then the next form, a higher grade form of power, was the ability to control capital. And we certainly saw this mostly in the Industrial Revolution with the Rockefellers and the Mellons and the Carnegies and, all of these industrialists, right? Capital controlled the world. And then the third form of power, which is the highest grade form of power, was information. And we are still living in the early era of the information society. It's still early, even though it's been going on for decades. But the information world will change everything forever. It already has changed everything forever, but this will continue to march forward even more. And these information tools, like the one we're using right now, Zoom, has enabled people to be remote. And what this all adds up to is a new world that we're waking up to, which, by the way, another book, The Fourth Turning, maybe you're familiar with that one, where they talk about how the world is changing, and 2020 and 2030 decades are going to be huge changes for the world, okay? So like Bob Dylan said years ago in the song, times they are changing, okay? And I think we can all agree on that. Many things happening. One is called supply-demand shock, and that's an economic phenomenon that hasn't happened really since the 70s, but it's happening again now. And what this means is that initially, when things get bad in a recession, usually it's because demand falls off. And like you said earlier, Ken, consumers are saving money. And this is ultimately a good thing, right? But it slows the economy down because nobody's spending. And 70% of the economy in the US is based on consumer spending, okay? So it's huge when demand falls off. When people get scared and they stop buying things and they're staying home and they're not spending, demand collapses. And that puts us into a recession. But the flip side of it, and this is the weird part in this era, is that also supply has declined. And so there was a housing shortage going into this. And now that the home is becoming the center of the universe, and people are much more committed to their housing than they ever have been in human history, possibly, because they can work remotely, they can work out remotely, and they want to socially distance, and there will be a post-traumatic stress disorder coming out of this, a PTSD phenomenon, where people want to live in a larger home, a more suburban style of living, non-high-rise, where they can socially distance. So an example of supply-demand shock, I'll just give you a quick one. In the 70s, it was mostly in the oil market. And, people might know about the gas lines. I mean, I remember when I was a little kid, we waited in line for 3 hours just to get a tank of gas. Okay. It was crazy what was going on. That was an example of supply-demand shock, and it's a miserable economic malady. And so in the airlines, when the pandemic broke out, if you look at, I just did this myself going to Google Flights, and I charted a flight from Miami to Los Angeles. Okay. And you see that the pricing was normal before the pandemic, okay? And, it cost you maybe $325 to buy that ticket, right? But then as the demand collapsed, the tickets got really cheap. And you could buy a ticket from Miami to LAX for less than $100. But then what happened is the airlines started canceling routes and grounding flights. And we've all seen the pictures probably of all of these jumbo jets, these huge, $100 million plus airplanes sitting in parking lots in storage, or where airports have closed multiple runways just so they could use those runways as a parking lot for jets, where they're just all stacked up on the runway and they're not flying. So now the price for that same ticket went way up. It went to $437 as the high. This is supply-demand shock. And this is going to happen in housing. This will happen in the housing market. Now, look, Ken, I saw your video about, and it was a great video, by the way, where you had all the circles, the one I'm talking about, on your, yeah. Yeah. And you talked about how we were going to go into this recession/depression. I don't know if you called it depression, but it may well be one. And there are going to be lots of foreclosures. There's going to be a lot of bankruptcies. We're already seeing just the tip of the iceberg on that, I think. It's going to get a lot worse. So I do not deny for a moment that the economy is going to be very hard hit. It already has been. And you did this other great video, Ken, where you talked about, how the normal unemployment rate, is maybe 4% or so, right? And, now it's skyrocketed. And we don't have to get everybody back to work, but the delta between the normal unemployment and what it is now, we got to get those people back to work. And how long will that take? And the reality is, a lot of those jobs, they ain't coming back, if you ask me. They're gone. Yeah, they're gone. And so we are going to wake up to a very different world, okay? And, we don't have time to talk about it today, but trickle-up economics is the opposite of trickle-down economics, where every contract in the world is now being renegotiated. We saw this during the Great Recession. It's like a game of hot potato. The renter says, well, I can't pay my rent. And then the landlord says, okay, well, I can't evict you right now. And by the way, that's changing, but, and rents are largely being collected, thankfully. The rent stats aren't as bad as we all thought they might be. Now, granted, we're only a couple months in, but it's looking like that's not such a bad problem, okay? But, many of those landlords or just homeowners go to their lender and say, hey, I can't pay the mortgage. Give me a forbearance, a loan modification, a workout, or a short sale, or I'm just going to let the property go, like they did during the Great Recession. We're still early, so we don't know how this is going to turn out. And then that lender passes that burden on to its mortgage-backed securities holders, right? And then they pass on that burden because they lost their return on investment to somebody else. So it's this game of hot potato where everybody passes everything down the line. Trickle-UP Economics, okay? I believe we are going to see a massive expansion of Section 8, the Housing Rental Assistance Program, or an entirely new program, and I don't even know what it'll be. But, we are moving into an era where the government is going to be much more involved in the economy, much more involved in our lives, for better or worse. Call it socialism. It's here, folks. Okay. The idea that I would love to see is a more libertarian world. I'm dreaming. It's not going to happen. Okay. We're going the other direction. No matter Democrat, Republican, it doesn't matter. Also, the rich are going to get richer. They're already getting richer because the rich have capital during tough times when other people don't have capital. So they can seize opportunities when opportunities are there. And Ken, in one of your recent videos, you talked about that. It's a great thing. Universal basic income. Even my most libertarian friends, and I had the presidential candidate, Andrew Yang, on my podcast talking about this. UBI, or universal basic income, it was already coming before the pandemic. And that was largely due to technology just destroying jobs. The economist, one of my favorite economists, Joseph Schumpeter, coined this phrase called creative destruction many years ago. And he talked about how free markets and capitalism creatively destroy businesses to create better new businesses. And this is a good thing, although it's painful at the time. There's a lot of bankruptcies, a lot of hardship, but we come back better. And in that process, technology was already taking away a lot of jobs. Just think when all the trucks and all the delivery cars are self-driving and your internet shopping deliveries are delivered by drones, okay? That is going to destroy a massive amount of jobs, and those jobs will never come back, okay? So technology is a creative destruction force, and a pandemic and social distancing is even more destructive to that. So I think we're going to see a universal basic income. It's coming. There's another thought that's really popular with the millennial generation, and that's called MMT, or modern monetary theory. I think it's largely a fantasy, but we're going to have it because we're already moving toward it. Okay. And I won't go into what it is today, but it's just going to be more of a thing. We're also going to see a push toward a cryptocurrency that is not necessarily Bitcoin or any of the others, but it's a digital dollar. The cryptocurrency that's going to win the game is going to be the one sponsored by the government and the Federal Reserve. That's the one that's going to win. Okay. And I'd love to be wrong about that. I'd love to see Bitcoin win the game. I just think the forces against Bitcoin are far too powerful, governments and central banks. And the dollar is going to be the thing, no matter what anybody says about, Ken, we've all heard it. The dollar's not backed by anything. Well, I have news for you. The dollar is backed by aircraft carriers and nuclear missiles. Okay, that's what the dollar is backed by. A standing army that is bigger than anything and more powerful than anything the human race has ever known. So if you think the dollar's not backed by anything, you're absolutely out of your mind. Okay, sorry about that, folks. But the dollar is very well backed. And, it's a game of comparison. When you say, oh, the dollar, the government's spending so much money. Yes, that's all true. I agree. And these deficits and the national debt, blah, blah, blah. I've heard all the arguments. I've made a lot of those arguments myself. And you're right. It's true. But the question is, compared to what? Compared to Japan, that has a 230% debt to GDP ratio? The U.S. has very little debt compared to Japan, okay? The third largest economy in the world. The U.S. is in a very, very good position in the global on the global stage, and the dollar is the reserve currency of the world, and that isn't going to change anytime soon. Okay, regardless of its detractors. So, PTSD, we talked about that. How we're going to wake up into PTSD. It's really a tale when it comes to real estate. It's a tale of three markets. It's not about there is no national real estate market. Okay. And Ken, you teach that, you know that all too well. Your followers know that. But when people listen to the mainstream media, when they look at the talking heads on CNBC, or they read a news story and someone's talking about the housing market, I don't know what that is. I don't know what you mean by that, right? Yeah. Are you talking about Los Angeles, Miami, Chicago, Memphis, Little Rock, Jacksonville, Florida, Indianapolis? Where's the housing market? In a country as large and diverse as the United States, you have about 400 local markets, and they can be divided into 3 categories: linear markets, cyclical markets, and hybrid markets. Okay? And with those linear, cyclical, and hybrid markets, they act very differently. Okay? The markets that will suffer most through this time will be the cyclical markets and the hybrid markets. Let me explain the difference, okay? Linear markets are boring markets that don't get much attention in the news media. They're the markets in the flyover states, as Hillary Clinton kindly put it, okay? They're the markets in the Midwest, the Southeast. These are markets that are not expensive, markets that have good cash flow, and markets where investors can buy properties that make sense from day one, okay? The properties are cheap. You can buy, $130,000 single-family homes that rent for somewhere in the neighborhood of $1,200, $1,300 a month. That's a great investment, okay? And those markets will not suffer very much, if at all, through this. Then there's the hybrid markets, in between linear and cyclical. These are places like Austin, Denver, okay? These are nice places. I like these cities a lot, but they've gotten a little bit expensive. They're not terrible. They're not way out of bounds by any means. They're okay, but not as solid and safe as the linear markets. Then there are the crazy cyclical markets, the ones that get all the news media attention. This is the West Coast of the US. It's the expensive northeastern markets, and it's South Florida, where I live, okay? So, if you're talking about LA, San Diego, San Francisco, Seattle, Miami, New York, Washington, D.C., Boston, Massachusetts, those types of places, these are very expensive markets. And if you're looking at a chart, okay, they look like a roller coaster because the prices have glorious highs and they have really ugly lows. And these are markets that are mostly, because the real estate is so expensive, they're mostly high density. And there is going to be a mass migration from high density to low density as the world wakes up. And we're already seeing it. We're already seeing this. And the lockdowns haven't even lifted yet, okay? So invest in linear and hybrid markets, avoid cyclical markets, okay? The home is the center of the universe. We talked about this already, but people in the business of selling things for the home are going to do pretty well, okay? Right when the pandemic broke out and all the gyms closed, all the home gym and workout equipment was just sold out every place. Peloton stock went way up, okay? And they were doing great, okay? So people are working out at home. They're working at home. If you sell home office stuff, you're in a good position. If you sell home gym equipment, you're in a good position. If you sell furniture, that's pretty good, okay? I'm not saying it's perfect. I'm just saying it's better than other things because the home is the center of the universe, okay? And the size of the home, people are going to try to increase it. They're going to try to move to lower cost markets where they can get more house for the money and be in a low density area, and that is suburbia. Suburbia, a uniquely American idea, okay? When you look around the world, and I've been to 87 countries now, when you look around the world, mostly around the world, you have this scenario. You have cities and you have the country. You have urban and rural. But in America, you have this middle idea. You have cities, you have suburbia, and then you have rural. You have 3 choices in the US. Mostly around the world, you have 2 choices. I'm not saying that's entirely true. It's not it's a general statement. Understand, I know there are suburbs in other countries, I get it. But suburbia is really an American thing. And so it gives us a lot of choices for investing because there's a lot of suburbs here, okay? Now, the other thing is I think there's a real mind shift too, Ken. I think people are gravitating toward a much simpler life. Okay. I think people during this pandemic time have reassessed their priorities. And I think they are prioritizing simpler, more important, more basic things. And we'll see if that's true as we come out of this. But I think that a simpler style of living is going to be the thing going forward. I also think we're going to see stagflation. Stagflation is kind of a crappy thing, okay? It's not fun. The last time we had real stagflation was in the 70s under Jimmy Carter, and the term the misery index became very popular back then because it was miserable. It's an environment where you have high unemployment and at the same time you have high inflation. And grocery prices, for example, just reached a 50-year high. So grocery prices now a 5-decade high relative to incomes, okay? So stagflation, not fun. But regardless, okay, there are opportunities through all of this. More socialism, no question about it. We are moving into a bigger government world where the government plays a bigger role in our lives, and it's going to be a more socialist type environment and a more George Orwellian 1984 environment where, we're being traced on our phones. They're doing already what they call contact tracing to find out who we're hanging out with and who's infected and who's not. And all of this is going to be just more intrusive. Okay. Now, a big idea for a general portfolio strategy, 70% of someone's money, this is my recommendation, in growing and flowing investments. And that's the type of real estate that Ken and I both like, okay? 10% in speculative investments, 10% in hedging investments, insurance. That's where you might buy some gold, some Bitcoin, okay? I'm not a huge fan of those things, but, they're insurance. I get it. And then cash reserves. Ray Dalio, very wealthy guy, certainly respect him. But, right at the beginning of this, he was out and making the rounds in the news media saying cash is trash. Well, I hate to say it, Ray was very wrong about that. Cash is not trash right now. Cash right now is pretty valuable, okay? But ultimately, he's right, because as inflation comes, cash becomes less valuable, okay? So we don't want that much in cash long term, but right at the moment, cash is good, okay? I talk a lot about this on my podcast. I know I have to go a little fast now for what we're talking about, but you can check out my podcast on iTunes or whatever. So the charts look awful, okay? I mean, I don't have to go through these in any great detail. We all know about this. Industrial production has plunged at the steepest rate in 7 decades. Unemployment through the roof. What's interesting to look at, though, is not just unemployment on that chart, but looking at this one that shows the sectors or the types of jobs that have the biggest unemployment rate. And so the service occupations, even construction and extraction like mining, although a lot of that is not as bad as it looks, and it's coming back, okay, because there's definitely a demand for housing. We've already seen that. Housing, I know it was kind of shut down for a while, but it is coming back with a roar already, and we've just seen a lot of articles about that in the past week. Again, things changing so fast, it's all subject to change quickly, okay? And so, you just look at this and, some of these jobs are just only going to come back to a small degree of where they were. Housing starts had a huge drop, but the demand is still there. The population is, it's still growing overall. So we need housing, definitely need housing. Now, Ken, you did a video where you talked about the shape of the recovery. And I loved that video, by the way. It was really good, okay? And you talked about the V shape, the U shape, and then there's like an L shape or a Nike swoosh. So you talked about this. Remember that video you just did? Yeah, really good stuff. So my opinion of the shape of this is sort of a new one. I think it is going to be a modified square root sign. And here's what I mean about that. You've all seen the square root sign. Maybe you don't remember it, but it's on the screen if you're watching. If maybe you're just listening to audio only. So that square root sign where it goes along, then it goes down, then it goes up even higher. Okay? But I think we're coming into this version of the square root sign. I think we are coming into a smaller economy where there will be less economic activity and lower GDP and a smaller economy. Now, initially, you might think I'm wrong about this because there has been some pent-up demand with lockdowns. And so, everybody in the world is starting to go out and get a haircut, for example, right? I just got one. Wow, that was nice. And my dog just got a bath. She hadn't had a bath for a couple of months, longest ever, right? And so now she's not stinky anymore. So initially you see this pent-up demand, but ultimately we're going to move into a smaller economy, a simpler life. I remember that TV show, The Waltons, from when I was a kid. I used to watch the reruns of The Waltons, a Great Depression era show. And here's kind of a funny, more modern version. Paris Hilton. Remember that reality show she did, The Simple Life? So we're going to move into a smaller economy. Remember, our economy is 70% consumer spending. When consumers don't spend, the economy has to shrink. Okay? That's the 70% rule. And I won't go into all these charts and stuff, but what I do want to talk to you about is these opposing forces. Okay? So opposing forces, deflation and inflation, right? And that war between these opposing forces has been on the deflationary side, technology and globalization. On the inflationary side, bad fiscal policy, meaning the government spends too much money, and bad monetary policy, meaning the Federal Reserve prints too much money. That's inflationary. Who will win the inflation-deflation outcome? Will it be technology and globalization causing deflation, or bad fiscal and monetary policy causing inflation? I mean, we have created so much money, trillions of dollars in such a short time. It is truly just staggering. No one can believe it, right? With what's happening. So who will win? We don't know yet. Outcome to be determined. But in terms of your investment portfolio and what you do, anybody listening to this, of course, on one side, we have recession or depression, okay? Right? Things are bad. No one would deny that. Versus migration. And this migration to lower density, lower cost of living environments. So when you listen to the talking heads talking about, well, the real estate market is going to suffer, what market is going to suffer? I say the markets that will suffer are the cyclical, expensive markets where people live in high density environments. But as people flee those markets, and they're already doing it, but it's going to be a tidal wave, we are going to see a lot more price increases, upward price pressure on both rents and sales prices in these smaller suburban markets, these second and third tier cities. And this is the stuff we've been helping our investors buy for 16 years now in places like Indianapolis, Atlanta, Charlotte, Ocala, Florida, Jacksonville, Florida, Dallas, Houston, San Antonio, all of these types of markets. We used to do Phoenix, where you live, Ken, in Scottsdale. Well, not Scottsdale, but Phoenix. And it just got too expensive and became more of a hybrid market. But these basic markets are going to attract a lot of money. This money is like a tidal wave coming at this, okay? So let me just see here. Here's one point. So the old rule of real estate was always location, location, location. That's been the rule of real estate since the beginning of time. If you were a caveman, location mattered. Was your cave safe from predators? Was it close to food and water? Location mattered. If you wanted a job in the industrial era, you needed to be near the factories. If you wanted a job in the information age, you needed to be near a city or in a city where you could have high income opportunities. Now, the whole world has woken up and realized that so many of us can work remotely. Even though we knew it before, the technology is not new. We've been, for 20 years, we could do WebEx and Skype and all this kind of stuff. And it was possible, but nobody did it. Now everybody, because necessity is the mother of invention, okay, everybody's been forced to do it. So now the mentality has completely shifted. Ken, back in 2012 on my podcast, I was saying this: location is less meaningful than it's ever been before. Location is less meaningful than it's ever been in human history. And the reason I was saying that 8 years ago was because of the self-driving car coming and how that has changed everything. Now, it's not quite here yet, but it's not far away either, okay? And now, with the pandemic, it has only accelerated this idea that location is less meaningful than it's ever been in human history. I talked about this on RT recently on an interview with Rick Sanchez and how this mass migration trend is developing. And Ken, I've identified 6 trends that contribute to this tidal wave, but I've been talking a lot. And we've also spent some time here. So I don't know how much we have time to go into. I've already touched on a few of them. So you let me know. Do you have questions, thoughts, or?
Well, first of all, thank you. This has been great. It always is. And when I go to your stuff and listen to your stuff, Jason, I always learn some great things. This is exactly what a lot of questions I'm getting. I would love to talk about the 6, the pent-up shadow demand, the things that you see, because, that's what people are asking, and I'm a massive, as you know, so is Robert Kiyosaki, a trend investor, where you got to follow the trends. In that video I did, I was talking about Buckminster Fuller. I said, don't fight the forces, use them, and the forces are in his world. He's a futurist too.
Yeah. He was an early futurist. Yeah, Bucky Fuller was great, and I know you and Robert talk about his work quite a bit. He invented the geodesic dome, and that guy was way ahead of his time. I mean, he's hard to understand. Like, you got to have some intelligence to grasp.
I can barely read his stuff. I sometimes have to read a sentence like multiple times.
I know, me too.
He's so smart.
Yeah.
But he was a trend guy. And that's why I loved how you started this with that. So let's finish up on these, pent up shadow demand trends, because I think that's what people want to know is, what do I do?
Yeah. What you do, and I'll just tell you now, basically what you do, but there's more to it than this, is invest in these properties that this tidal wave of demand is coming at. There is a tidal wave, a tsunami of demand coming at properties in lower density environments, lower cost of living environments, the simple life, PTSD, all of this stuff. I mean, we're going to have a vaccine. We're going to have better treatments. We're going to have protocols. We're going to have contact tracing, for better or worse. Big Brother is going to be watching us, sadly. But the pandemic's not going to be with us forever. This is going to blow over, okay? And maybe it'll just naturally disappear, because some of these do. They just kind of, summer comes and they just kind of naturally fade away, right? But the thought, the memory is going to be with us for a generation. This is like people who are having, like my neighbors just had a baby, okay? And I think, 25 years from now, those parents, my neighbors, are going to be talking to their new son about this time. This is like a big deal in history right now. Folks, you are living through history. Okay. I mean, we always were living through history, but this is a major occurrence. This is not a small thing, what's going on right now. So one of the 6, roommates. So Ken, it's hard to get stats on roommates. That's the first thing I want to say. So some of this stuff I'm going to talk about is like back of the napkin math. And literally one of the graphics I'm going to show you is a napkin. Okay. So we're going to do some back of the napkin math here. So don't hold me to like the exact things. The idea is to identify the macro trend. okay? You don't need to know the exact numbers, okay? You just need to know the macro trend, and you need to position yourself out in front of it so you can surf that wave, okay? And that's what we're going to help you do. Okay, and you know, we've got more. We've got a whole webinar. We've got a whole course on this stuff, and you know, Ken will tell you about that later, possibly on another one of his shows too. But roommates. Okay, so as of 8 years ago, 32% of the adult population of the United States was doubled up with roommates in non-romantic relationships. Okay. So think about this conversation that has probably happened in millions of roommate households. Here it goes. It goes like this. One roommate says to the other, hey, you know, now that I'm working out of the house, you know, I really need that second bedroom as a home office. And, you know, my employer told me that they're even going to give me an extra $300 a month, and they're going to let their office space go because, you know, they've told, you know, pretty much the entire team they can work out of the house. Okay, so that's what one guy says. And then the other roommate says, and I'm doing my role play here. I'm really bad at this, by the way. The other roommate says, hey, you know what? I was thinking the same thing. I need that second bedroom so I can have a home office. And, you know, by the way, it also sucks because, you know, we used to never see each other. We'd just both come home to sleep before. And now, you know, we're not going out, and the gym is closed, and we don't have any place to work out. And, you know, we're tripping over each other, and I can't talk on the phone when you're talking on the phone, and it's too distracting. So I need that second bedroom. So one of us has to move out. So now they split up. And guess what? You just doubled the demand for housing. Double. That's a big deal. Double, okay? Double is a big deal. That doubles the demand for housing. So the home needs to get larger. So if someone was living in a one-bedroom apartment, or two people were living in a two-bedroom apartment, they got to split. And now maybe, you know, a lot of people are saying, well, Jason, you know, they can't afford that because times are tough. Well, some people can, okay? Information workers are sailing through this pretty well, okay? But regardless, what I'm saying is that the likelihood is going to be they're going to move to a lower cost city. They're going to move to a less expensive area. I got a friend, a young guy. He lives in, he went to ASU, and he lives in New York City. Okay, he's in the Wall Street world. You know, he works in finance. Okay, and he actually technically lives in New Jersey. Okay, but he works in New York City, and he pays, I think, $4,000 a month for a 650 square foot apartment. Okay, and he's been working at home for a couple of months now. Right? Do you think that's very pleasant? And suddenly, both he and his employer realize he doesn't need to come in. He's been doing his job at home. So now the likelihood is that kind of person is going to go find a two-bedroom place, or maybe even a three-bedroom place in a more suburban, much less expensive environment. And you know what they're going to pay for that? They're going to pay like $1,500 or $1,800 a month. Okay? And they can still do all the same work because they're working on Zoom anyway. And guess what? Guess how much money they have left over now? You think the economy is terrible and this is all bad news? There's a lot of disposable income that's going to become available. If his income stays the same, or even if it declines, okay, and his rent went from $4,000 to $1,800, that's a lot of extra money. That's $2,200 extra every month to spend on something else, to maybe start a business with, maybe buy some more properties with. Okay, so roommates, one big trend. Okay, now the other one, and it's kind of funny, the coronavirus baby boom. Hey, people been locked up, and you know, if they're not arguing and fighting, they might be making love. Okay, and a lot of people have said that you know, maybe 9 months from now there will be a baby boom, and you know, we don't know yet. Okay, but we'll see. The other side of that, this has already been proven because it's already happened in China, a divorce boom. Okay, people, crammed up together, they can't stand each other. They're getting on each other's nerves. So couples splitting up, okay? And look at this on the screen. China's divorce spike is a warning to the rest of the lockdown world. Filings started rising in March as couples emerged from quarantine, okay? Will coronavirus intimacy lead to a baby boom or a divorce tsunami? All right. And then look at this one. Divorce cases rise in China as couples spend too much time together during coronavirus home quarantine. Folks, this is real. If people split, you've literally doubled the demand for housing. That's double. Roommates split, double. They need 2 houses instead of 1. Couples split, 2 houses instead of 1. Couples have babies, they need at least 1 extra bedroom now, okay? So there's a lot of changes. And this is a funny thing from Gilligan's Island. I don't know if you remember that show. A couple of weeks in isolation with your family, what could go wrong? Now, this is the back of the napkin math, okay? This is the 84%. Ken, 84% of the U.S. population lives in what is defined as urban areas. And at the bottom of the screen here, let me just share with you some numbers on this, okay? The average population density in the U.S. is very low. It's only 87 people per square mile. Like, it's super low, okay, when you look at it. 87 people per square mile. The average population density in these metropolitan areas is 283 people per square mile. But the average population density in New York City is 27,000 people per square mile. So just look at that. I mean, and look at the impact that has on one's life and their ability to socially distance. It's absolutely insane. So you take 84% of the population, and maybe a small percentage of those wants to move from high to low density environments, from this high rise pictured here to a suburban community. And this is huge. This is the number of completed apartment buildings based on the type: low rise, mid rise, or high rise. Let me define those. Low rise is 4 stories and under. Mid rise is 5 stories and above, or 5 to 12 stories, and high rise is 12 stories and above, okay? So let's take a look at this. Now, these are the types of suburban areas that we specialize in. This is just a screenshot from my website, jasonhartman.com, and it just shows, these suburban markets, and there are many others. This is just an example. But look at the number of households in the US, okay? From 1960 to 2019, we are now at 128.5 million households, just to give people a reference point, okay? Here's the napkin. Let's do the napkin math. You ready? So we got 268 million people living in urban environments. That's the 84%, okay? And how many of these cannot socially distance? Well, we don't know, because the definition of urban is pretty broad. So we don't know. It's not all New York City. Some of it is. Some of it's downtown LA, downtown San Diego, downtown Seattle, whatever, Chicago, Miami. A lot of that is high density, but some of it isn't. So let's just assume that only 15% want to move, okay? That's 40 million people. And if it's 2 people per household, because remember, urban people usually don't have kids, okay? Most urban people are no kids. When you look at the division of these, and this is just rental units. This does not include condos. It's rentals only, okay? And these statistics, by the way, were hard to come by. I got some of this stuff from Rent Cafe, and I actually had to call them and ask for a special project to get some of this info, because dividing it is pretty hard. But you've got almost 1 million high-rise rental units. That's 12 stories and over, okay? And mid-rise, 5 stories and over, you've got about 1.3 million, for a total of about 2.3 million units, okay? Now, those are people that have to take an elevator. Now, I didn't look at 4 stories, where people will probably take an elevator, or 3 stories, they'll probably take an elevator too, but I just looked at the definite you need an elevator, okay, which is 5 stories and above, okay? So that's 2.3 million units. If 15% of those people, a pretty small number, want to move, and these are just rentals, not including condos, that's 340,000 people that's number of units, 340,000 units, not people, units, okay? Spread that around 50 markets, metropolitan statistical areas that are low density, that would be the fit for them. And that means you need about 7,000 units in each of these markets that already have a massive housing shortage, okay? So this is pretty big. This is a tidal wave. It's a tsunami, okay? Oh, and this is from Yardi, okay? Carl Icahn, talking about this, the big corporate raider, talking about shorting commercial real estate, okay? And he's talking about retail and office space mostly. Industrial and apartments, that's different. I wouldn't worry as much about those. But retail and office, definitely. But look at this. This is March 26th, okay, from the Wall Street Journal, when the pandemic really got underway and the lockdowns got underway, the quarantines got underway. This is Google search data for the phrase work from home, okay? And look at how this shot up. I mean, that's not even a hockey stick chart. That's just a straight up, okay? It's crazy. So the remote work experiment will cause companies and workers to reconsider their location, okay? And this is from apartmentlist.com. I interviewed them on my show. Over the last decade, many companies, new and old, have invested in proximity, paying sky-high commercial real estate rents in knowledge hubs such as San Francisco, Seattle, and New York City. In response to COVID-19, however, many of these companies are now having all their employees work from home in an unprecedented remote work experiment. Okay? I don't need to read what's on the screen anymore, but you get the idea. This is a giant trend. I mean, this is a tsunami, folks, for real estate demand in the right place. Look at this demand for office space and how it's deteriorated. And it's going to deteriorate a lot more. We've only seen the beginning of that. Here's the remote workers, okay? Look at the roommates. 2 people comfortable in a 2-bedroom home, families, 4 people comfortable in a 3-bedroom home, right? You got a couple in 1 bedroom and 2 kids in each of the 2 other rooms. Well, guess what? The kids are now studying at home, no matter what age they are, right? They need space to study and work, and so do the parents. So the size of the house needs to get a little bigger, okay? And these people will be buying these properties in lower priced environments. Smaller part of the trend, but no less a trend, shadow demand, remote. It's not just remote work, it's remote working out because the gyms are closing, okay? And people need that garage or that spare bedroom for a home gym, okay? And, multi-generational living. That's the last part of this trend. We've all seen this terrible, terrible stories coming out of assisted living homes and nursing homes. And there are 28 million people in the US who are older than 70 years. For decades, we've been talking about this trend called the graying of America, the graying of America. And by the way, I'm getting some of that gray myself. And I think it looks pretty good, actually. So I like it. It's the bald part I don't like so much, but the gray is fine. But 28 million people over 70 in the graying of America, right? And look at this. They're talking to their relatives that they can't even go in the home and see them. FaceTime, conventional assisted living homes are death camps today due to the Wuhan bat soup flu. You probably know that guy's politics. But signs on the doors of assisted living homes, no visitors, okay? This is huge. I think mom and dad are going to, or, at least mom, because women live longer, are going to be living with their families. This is how it works all over the world, except in the US. In Latin America, Asia, Middle East, multi-generational living is normal. Only in America is it not, because we're so prosperous, right? So you're going to start to see more space needed for mother-in-law's quarters, or maybe in an apartment building, like a low-density garden-style apartment building, like some of your portfolio, Ken. You're going to see an additional unit rented so that elderly can live near their kids, right? And they call this the sandwich generation. This is just about retail spending and more of the charts and but this one's interesting. Remote work favors higher paid employees. So this the economic devastation is very uneven in the way it's hitting people. Okay, and these higher paid people are going to move out of these high density areas into lower density areas where they feel safe and can socially distance. Okay. Airbnb, that's been a catastrophe. I mean, the Airbnb market has just been devastated. The one caveat I have on that, though, that I think is going to be okay, is Airbnb or short-term rental properties where people can drive, not fly, to get away and have a uniquely different experience than where they live. I think those actually will do okay. For example, I interviewed Dottie Herman on my podcast, and she is the CEO of Douglas Elliman Real Estate, a hugely successful New York real estate company. And I couldn't believe, Ken, how candid she was, talking about how people are just fleeing the city and they're going to the Hamptons and they're going to outlying areas. And so this is going to happen everywhere. It's not just New York. New York's just the biggest example we have, but it's happening all around the country, all around the world. Okay. So I can show you charts till I'm blue in the face, but hey, there's a lot more. So, Ken, you and I are going to offer the course on this, and I'm excited about that. Right now, people can just go to pandemicinvesting.com and grab some more information about this, a free video, ebook, and audio download if they want it. I tried to take 8 hours of content and share it all here, so I hope I didn't overwhelm people too much.
Well, I love it. A lot of these trends that you're talking about, also happened in 2008. And so what we were trying to do is just make sure that we were working with people. If they lost their jobs, that let's figure this out. And so we've had a really, really, really soft landing. We had 93 rentals last week, virtually. So we're doing virtual rent. It's crazy. Like, we installed chat bots on all our projects in March, within the first 2 weeks, so we could accommodate people. And then, of course, we're on the front line. So we have a lot of, we had to figure out around PPP or PPE, and we have a lot of residents that have COVID. So yeah. So, we're dealing with all these things, but even through all of that, we've had tremendous growth, and our income was not really impacted like we thought it was going to be. And that's largely because, Jason, as you know, you can buy a piece of real estate, but if you don't put somebody in there that can pay it, then you're going to have a cash flow issue. So the screening of the folks that are in our properties is showing up right now. In April, we collected 99% of what we thought we were going to be, and as of earlier this week, we're at 98% for May.
Yeah, I mean, and what's interesting about that, Ken? Well, two things. Number one, I want to talk to you about that technology in a moment, the virtual tours, because that's going to be with you. That's going to benefit you for years to come. And now everybody's accepted it. Your operation's going to get less expensive to run, and there's going to be less friction for people to find a new house. Like the whole house hunting problem is becoming easier now. This is great. Like,
yeah, operating expenses are going to go down.
I know. So that's going to be good for real estate investors. That's going to be really good. And, it's going to be good for tenants too, because it's going to be easier for them to do their home search. because everybody's adopted these virtual showings. And even if they're not virtual, a lot more of our property managers in our network and our investors are doing like, self, what do I want to call it? Self lock boxes, right? Where the people can just get an app on their phone and they can access the house, go look at it themselves, no contact. And you can do that now with technology. The security is not a problem, like it used to be.
Well, it's, people do that now with normal things. They sit and Amazon boxes show up every day at your house. And so that people are very used to being able to do things like that. I bought a car during this pandemic and never drove it. It's in Minnesota. It got shipped out yesterday. There was only 3 of like them in the country, and I wanted one. And so I cut the deal online. I actually never spoke to the guy. It was all email and photos, and it's being shipped out right now. And and I actually had another friend do the exact same thing. They said it's awesome. We didn't have to, you just negotiate online, and and your banking's online, and everything's online.
It's frictionless. And that is good. All these efficiencies that we're creating in the economy are going to stay with us. This is good. Necessity is the mother of invention, Ken. And people, now that it's necessary, people have been forced to adopt, this technology. And, they should have done it years ago anyway. But there was never an urgency.
Never a reason. Yeah. No, I agree. It's funny that one of the things that we studied, I know you do, is when you have these highs and you have these lows, at the lows you learn. You don't. I don't know about you, but when I'm making money and
you don't learn as much,
buying stuff, and we're not reading as much, and we're not listening as much, and making too much money. It's when when things stop that happens.
You get a lot more curious. And, speaking of which, it doesn't just happen to us, but you get a lot more curious and you want to learn more. But also a lot of these people that have been sitting at home, some are not using their time productively. They're watching TV and drinking beer and eating potato chips. But some people are being productive. They're like learning new skills. Online, you can go to the Khan Academy, you can go to brilliant.com, you can go to Skillshare, you can go to Udemy, all these sites where you can go to Code Academy. And if you were an Uber driver or a waiter and you were displaced, now you can learn to code and do programming. So a lot of people are doing their education.
I wrote 2 books, and I now am in the early stages of playing the guitar. So I swear I went on the iPad. I bought a guitar and I started. Yeah, I'm like, I'm a beginner, but
what are you playing?
I've just got a few chords right now, so I got a Taylor guitar.
Do you know? Yeah, what was interesting? Eddie Van Halen, of course, right? The famous guitarist, right? Do you know that when he started, his guitar moves were so unique that he didn't want anybody to figure out what he was doing to make those sounds, and he would turn away from the audience when he would play live, and he'd go tapping the neck and making those cool sounds that he makes with his guitars. Yeah, that was like a trademark.
Well, Jason, I just figured out how to hold it.
Yeah. I bet you look cool though.
But you're right. It's like, how do you spend your time, or what do you spend your time on? And I'm pouring myself into this kind of research like you, because the truth is, there's a lot of money to be made, a lot, based on the new trends. And then people are going to look back on this, just like you predicted about location in 2012.
Yeah.
Like you saw it. You said, you saw something a lot of people didn't see is, because of technology, we can be anywhere we want. We can work from anywhere we want. I mean, by the way, you've done that. I watched you move around to where you want. And you can run your business from wherever you want.
I know. I could live in another country if I wanted to. I could go live in Europe. Not that I want to, but it's totally doable. And folks, people are finally starting to use that cord-cutting freedom that they've got. And, look, they can live in one of your places or one of my places for way less money than living in LA and downtown LA or New York City or whatever. And they'll have a better life. That's the thing about it. You just don't need to be in those cities anymore.
I know. I have actually a buddy that was in real estate, actually still is. He lived in Phoenix and he flew to LA every day.
Yeah.
I mean, and I'm like, and he was like one of the top few on American Airlines, that year. And I go, how did you do that? He goes, it's just back and forth from LA every day. He goes, it's just like an hour commute. And I just did it by airplane. And he did it because he didn't want to spend, $2 to $3 million on a home. And he had an amazing home out here for $1 million.
Right. Yeah.
And it's like, hey, why not? I just Uber from the airport, and that's a little extreme. That's taking a commercial airline every day. But the point is that he did. And by the way, he's in real estate. He does commercial, office, industrial, and they were out looking at deals in the private equity company, and buying all over the place.
Yeah.
So you can do it.
Yeah, no, you can do it. They call those extreme commuters. And a lot of people do that live in Dallas, right near the big Dallas airport, because you're in the center of the country. And, there are neighborhoods near the airport in Dallas where the airport shuttle actually drives into the neighborhood to pick people up. So literally the airport shuttle is an extension into the neighborhoods because those are where these extreme commuters live. I read a big article about that years ago.
And the point is that these are real estate moves, because that's what I loved about your, these trends and these pandemic investing. And people need to stop watching the news. Obviously you need to watch it to, just stay updated. But I haven't actually watched the news in almost 2 weeks. Just because it's kind of the same thing, and I just watch the COVID numbers go up, and it's sad to watch. But for me, I'm trying to figure out, where, I love Wayne Gretzky's quote. They said, why are you such a great hockey player? And he said, well, I never skated to where the puck is. I always skated to where it was going to go.
That's the rule of life right there. That advice.
So that's what these are, guys. That's these are what's happening. The baby boomer generation moving back with their family. That is definitely going to happen. The babies also, 9 months from now, that's going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
The divorces, that's going to happen. We're already hearing about it here in the United States. Those are things that are happening. Those are splitting households. Those are growing households.
And the roommates splitting up too.
Those trends. I own commercial office buildings. I talked to my partner last week, and he's like, yep, we lost these tenants. Their businesses got wiped out due to COVID. They just moved out. Didn't matter if they had a lease or whatever. So
yep, they just broke it. Yep.
It's happening, guys. It's absolutely happening.
Yeah, absolutely. So the deal is, don't be paralyzed by what's going on in the world. Surf the wave, right? It's a giant tidal wave, and you want to get out in front of it. You want to surf down the face of it and be in front of it before it gets there, right? And you're going to profit from it. And you're really, it's not just about you making money and profiting from it. You're serving people. Like, people need housing in these markets. So, you can provide it for them and provide them an opportunity to escape the city
or a business or start a business, in front of it. The point is again, back to Buckminster Fuller, don't fight the forces, use them. Where are things going, and just be out in front of them. That's it. And so that's, whatever it is you're going to do, whether it's you're going to move your business there, you're going to start a new business there, you're going to buy real estate there, it doesn't really matter. Just know you're probably not going to want to do commercial office. You're probably not going to want to get involved in retail.
Yep.
And those are things that are, changing. And so I loved it, Jason. And I know people can get a lot more information on your on the stuff that you do. And, you were showing me some of the courses that you offer. And, congratulations on all that. This is really wonderful.
Thanks. And Ken, we put a special link up for your listeners. I don't know when you're exactly going to publish this. I assume it'll be in the next week or so. But the link is jasonhartman.com/Ken. So jasonhartman.com, which is our website, /Ken, where you can get a lot more information on this. And, I think we'll stick the slides in there because there were a lot of graphs. And for the people that only listened on audio, if you only listened to the podcast and didn't see the YouTube, then you can get the visuals. Okay. Right.
And Hartman has one N, and so we'll go ahead and put that link up to Jason on the video. And I just can't thank you enough for your time. And let's jump back on, in a couple of months, because as I pour in my heart and soul into the research and trends and studying you do, it's always good, to compare notes.
Yeah, absolutely. And in 2 months, Ken, a lot's going to change. We know that.
I know. Well, man, good luck. I can't wait to hear, what you're working on next. And let's keep posted. And thank you very much for, such incredible information for everybody today.
Hey, my pleasure, and happy investing to you and all of your listeners and viewers, Ken.
Okay. See you later, Jason.